You know, I've seen this opera a gazillion times, and it still breaks me in half every time I see it. I mean, a good performance of it. It's amazing, isn't it? That, you know, it's such an opera that's done probably on a daily basis throughout the world somewhere, you know, and it still packs quite a wallow. I'm reminded that these very popular works, Man of Butterfly certainly maybe the most popular opera ever composed, maybe second to Carmen, you know, it's, who's to say, but it's certainly among the most popular operas ever composed. And I'm reminded that the reason these works get very popular is because they're stupendous masterpieces, and they continue to move us so deeply as stories. No matter how many times we've heard the story or seen the story, they continue to somehow speak to us on a very deep level. And I'd like to think, especially when you get a performance like today that's so beautifully sung and so beautifully conducted, and in particular, so just when the soprano is singing the role of Butterfly is so emotionally connected to what she's doing, which I think Kelly Kaduce's performance as Butterfly is among one of the most moving I've ever seen. And I know I can't be objective. You know, Kelly was here 2 years ago. She made her debut with us as Mimi in La Boheme, and we really wanted to get her back, and so we're thrilled that we got her back to sing Butterfly. So I think she's coming out in a few minutes. She's getting out of costume and makeup, I believe she is. So you're stuck with me for the time being. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the opera or about this production or about Puccini or anything else that might be on your mind. As long as we don't talk about the Super Bowl, because I'm taping it and I know nothing about it. So no one is to reveal any aspect of any score of the Super Bowl under penalty of death. Yes, sir.
I compliment you on the staging. It was very nicely done.
Thank you, sir. This gentleman liked the staging. This is a production that was created, believe it or not, in the late 1960s by a director named Frank Corsaro, American theater director, who was actually my teacher, my mentor. It was created for the New York City Opera in the late 60s and was a staple piece for at least 25 years there. And then when I became general director here in 2003, we purchased the sets and costumes. And we had them all refurbished, and we hired Frank's assistant, Christian Smith, to put his production together. So we maintained the staging and the concept, and I think it's still one of the most moving and insightful Butterflies I've ever seen in terms of how it tells the story. Believe it or not, this production, since you happen to bring it up, was considered rather controversial when it first opened in the late 60s. So it just goes to show, because I think this most people would describe this as a very naturalistic and relatively traditional, in the best sense of the word, this production. But it was quite controversial, primarily for Butterfly being dressed in Western dress in Act 2. That critics and audiences had never seen that before. The fact that the director and the designer made the decision to put her in a Western dress and in a Western haircut for Act 2, which raised a number of eyebrows back then. I mean, when you think about it, it's a woman that insists she is an American housewife, that she is an American bride. And by so many of the lines she says in Act 2. So it makes sense. In Act 1, you see her looking at the other sailors and their wives in the wedding scene, and you know, one can imagine that she sees what would have been fashionable dress for women at the turn of the century. And so, perhaps she ordered something in the Sears catalog, But nonetheless, that was considered controversial. But I love this production. I think it's a unique production. And I love the little touches that one sees throughout it. Little things, but like in Act 1, when after the wedding scene, when all the Americans throw rice and then all the Japanese scoop it up because it's something sacred, that the idea of Western and Eastern culture clashing, the moment in Act 2 when Sharpless comes to visit and he goes to take off his shoes, as one would do in a Japanese household, and then Goro says, no, don't bother, because she sees this as an American household, so you can keep your shoes on. I mean, little insightful touches like that I find very interesting about this production. Questions? Good question. The question, the woman is saying that she noticed, I guess, in one of our articles in our program, there are actually 3 different versions of this opera. The Puccini composed it in 1904, and opening night was a flat-out disaster, if you can imagine such a thing. It was not well received at all by critics. Just goes to show what critics tend to know sometimes, right? So originally well, actually the question is, do the other versions exist? Yes. One occasionally sees the 1904 version performed. This is the 3rd revision. This is the one that most people know. Originally, Acts 2 and 3 were combined, so there was just one intermission. There was Act 1, and then the waiting scene. In other words, when you see Suzuki and Butterfly and Sorrow waiting at the screen, that just segues right into Act 3 the next morning. There's no intermission there. Puccini put in an intermission and added the sort of prelude to Act 3. And will you welcome our Butterfly? This is Kelly Kaduce. Thank you for getting out of costume and makeup so quickly. May I first ask you a question?
Yes.
Which is, and I might have asked you this before, but I'm curious to revisit it again with you because, this opera packs such an emotional wallop. We get that exquisite love duet at the end of Act 1, and everyone goes floating out to intermission to have a glass of wine, and then they come back and gradually get their heart broken throughout the course of Act 2, and then they get their heart torn out at the end of Act 3. How do you balance being able to sing this, the act of actually singing it? Because you have to sing over an orchestra of over 60 musicians without amplification. So you have to, from a technical standpoint, you have to focus on singing, but then it's emotionally so intense, and you act it with such conviction. How do you balance the two?
Well, I think the first time I did this, I didn't balance it so well, and it was really difficult to get through. So I think the key for me is to think about, as acting like 101, is to take a look at, is to actually conjure up the emotion that Butterfly's feeling at the time. Take a look in the mirror, scan your body, see how you feel, and then to simply just imitate the emotion with your body and with your voice so that you can think technically but still convey the emotion without completely falling apart. And actually for that last aria, it's written so quite well. It's really in the upper register, so even if you are falling apart a little bit, you can still get it out. And then acting-wise, I think it's really important because even one of the kids that we had in rehearsal were actually kind of scared of the knife and didn't want to come out when they saw me with the knife. So there's another element of that. If Butterfly literally falls apart in that last art, you kind of have to keep it together for the kid or the kids. Even in the course of the show, if you did that in front of a 3-year-old, they wouldn't want to play. They would be upset with you. So it kind of works that way too.
The observation is, the sheer volume of Kelly's voice when she performs it, and she's noticed that when she's cradling the child, sometimes she holds her hands over his ears, and is that very common, or does the child have earplugs? How does that work?
They auditioned several kids, and I came in for the audition, and I had to sing in front of them. And the 2 that we picked, actually weren't really fazed by it at all. And I told them that they could have the option of earplugs if they wanted them, but both of them were fine. And I think it's important to cover their ears when you're doing that loud aria, because I think in performance it's probably even louder than what it's been in rehearsal, and their ears are so tender. So.
Yes. Yeah, so the question is, the last time this woman saw it, they used a puppet for the child. Now, so I assume you're talking about the Metropolitan Opera production, because the current Met production, for some reason that's totally unknown to me, they actually have a wooden puppet as trouble, as the child, and they have 2 kabuki, the convention in kabuki theater where you have dancers or actors wearing total black, so the idea is that you don't really perceive them moving this puppet, this sort of wooden puppet of a child. No, we never considered doing that. This production, as I said, was created years ago, and it always had a real child. And we're very lucky. We have two kids. We have Finnegan, who performed it on Friday, we have Caitlin today. Typically, you'll cast two children just in case one gets sick or in case one has a panic attack before they come on stage. You have the other one standing by.